I first played Dark Souls in 2014. I had finally found a full-time job and had it for a while, so I decided to finally see what all the hype was about this game. So I picked up a copy for my Xbox 360 and went home from work to give it a try. I had seen all the memes, seen all the hype around how hard of a game it was, how it was the ultimate test for gamers. I beat the tutorial and instantly became confused when I got to Firelink Shrine. The crestfallen warrior told me I needed to ring 2 bells, one up above and one down below. How do I get up above? I can't find a path up there. I should note here that I was playing on a boxy CRT television that I had been playing on since the Nintendo 64 days, and my friends often asked me how I could see what was going on in games. I was a broke college student, okay? Anyway, since I couldn't find a way up above, I decided to go down below. I saw 2 ways down below. One led to a bunch of ghosts that I can't do damage to, and the other led me to some skeletons. After realizing I can't just run past the ghosts, I decided to fight the skeletons. They did a lot of damage and had a lot of health. This must be where Dark Souls becomes the super hard game everyone was telling me about. Being a generally clever gamer, I decided to use the Morning Star I found in a chest nearby on them. Blunt damage works best on skeletons in most games, right? Even with this weapon, it took me try after try to finally beat a skeleton. When I beat the skeleton, it almost immediately came back to life. What the hell was this? Screw this, I'm going to get online and look up how to kill these things for good. I can't be trying to trial and error this when it takes so long just to beat one skeleton. I got online and found out that I was going completely the wrong way and that I actually needed to go toward the aqueduct up above that I had missed earlier. From there, it was pretty smooth sailing for a while. While this wasn't the kind of RPG that had safe zones where you can slow down and really take a minute to live out your character's day-to-day life, I got pretty comfortable in the Undead Burg, chilling by the bonfire and practicing the game's mechanics while I grinded some souls to use at the nearby merchant. I once again had to look up where to go after I beat the Bell Gargoyles, because for some reason this game thought a first-time player would finish the Undead Parish quickly enough to still remember the unassuming key they picked up just before entering the area, and still remember the locked door by Solaire and put 2 and 2 together. I still didn't know what an iframe was at this point. Of course I didn't finish it quickly enough to still remember these details by the end. We all remember our first time getting cursed in Dark Souls. Some of us make a big enough deal out of it that we spend hours analyzing the lore behind it and making a video about it. It was in the depths, where everyone gets cursed for their first time, and it completely caught me off guard. I had seen stats like curse resistance on armor, but nothing ever explained what curse was. Apparently it takes half your health permanently? Fuck you, Dark Souls. I almost quit and started a brand new character then, but decided to figure out how to undo the curse. I spent the rest of the playthrough in fear of the game forcing more of this kind of unnecessary cruelty onto me. This kind of rancid, anti-fun game mechanic used to artificially inflate the difficulty. But it never happened. Apparently the Depths Basilisk trap is a one-time gimmick, just used to teach you to be afraid when you see the little skull icon pop up, and you can only be cursed in 2 other areas, one of them being optional. I still think that this is the single worst mechanic to ever exist in a Soulsborne game, but I won't stay too mad at FromSoft as they did fix it in later games. Still, you can say skill issue and make every excuse you want. I will die on the hill that DS1 Curse is an objectively bad mechanic that only takes away from the fun of the game. With the Basilisk-free route through the depths forever burned into my mind, I progressed through the rest of the game. The only major stumbling blocks I remember were being lost in Blighttown forever due to my crappy TV making it hard to tell one samey scaffolding from another, and having to look up solutions to 2 of the late game areas, namely how to drop into the abyss without dying and how to get to Seath. Did I mention that I was playing completely offline? I didn't have an Xbox Live subscription, so the orange signs left by other players weren't there to aid me. I also missed out on NPC summons as well as kindling bonfires, because I thought the only reason to ever reverse hollowing was if you wanted to play online. For some reason, I assumed kindling it was some kind of thing that made it easier to summon other players, so I never even tried it. I always do something dumb like this on my first playthrough. I beat all of Dark Souls 3 for the first time without ever figuring out how to upgrade my Estus Flask. Despite playing in the hardest possible way for a new player, I beat the game and was moderately happy with it. It was an okay game, good if you want to test your skills. The combat was challenging, if not as deep as some of the other games I was playing at the time. Still, people online were obsessed with this game, and I didn't understand the level of dedication. It was a good game, but surely not worth fanboying over that hard. Later on, I got a gaming PC and tried Dark Souls 2. I got bored with it and never beat it. Apparently, a lot of people online shared my opinion of it, which was that it was an absolute slog. Not much to say about that game at this point in time. Finally, Dark Souls 3 came out. This was the one that made me really appreciate the combat. It was so fast and responsive, and the boss fights were the best in the series, even if the areas didn't have the same kind of cool atmosphere of the past two games. This one actually made you feel like a warrior doing battle. After beating it a couple times, I was hooked on Dark Souls. I finally decided to look into all the complex lore and world building that the series did, digging beneath my current surface level understanding of things. This led me to buy Dark Souls Remastered for my PC and dedicate some time to experiencing the first Dark Souls the right way, with a modern monitor, full online functionality, and attention to the small details of the lore and world building. Being used to Dark Souls 3 and its fast combat at the time, I knew that my original tactic of mid-rolling with the sword and shield would bore me. I wanted something different. I picked a pyromancer, leveled some dexterity, and played through the first half of the game alternating between throwing fireballs and two-handing a scimitar or katana. Once I realized how rarely you actually need to lock on against normal enemies, the combat became nearly as fun as Dark Souls 3. To my surprise, the Basilisk's PTSD was so potent that even now, 4 years after my initial playthrough, I remembered to slide down the left side of the waterfall in the depths and hug the wall. I catch myself doing that in nearly every game where I have to slide down something in a sewer or a cave now. By the time I had reached Blighttown and was chilling by the bonfire on the bridge, I realized something. I was actually comfortable here. This is usually regarded as the worst part of the game, but even here I was just having fun, just soaking in the atmosphere and relaxing as I explored. I wasn't treating the game as some kind of great gatekeeper of true gaming skill, but as an interesting world with deep lore and a thick, brooding atmosphere. There lies the true key to appreciating Dark Souls. My perspective during my first playthrough had been poisoned by all the hype over how hard it was, to the point that I was willing to try to brute force my way through the graveyard at the beginning of the game because I thought it was just supposed to be that hard. As such, I was treating the game as some type of torture device designed to punish the player rather than as an adventure to go on. I do have to once again mention that the curse mechanic didn't help with this, so the developers aren't completely blameless in that perception being there. Once I learned to stop and smell the roses rather than constantly worrying about whether I was good at the game or not, a lot of things just kind of fell into place. I started noticing more, appreciating more. I let myself get comfortable in the game's world rather than feeling the constant need to crush the next challenge and prove myself as a real gamer. I explored more of the mechanics, learned to strategically kindle important bonfires, tried a few of the covenants, and learned to vary my approach to situations rather than just dedicating myself to either heavy or light armor and weapons. I even started coming up with simple backstories for my characters. I've beaten Dark Souls Remastered on New Game Plus 7 on one character at this point, and made several others as well. I even promised myself I'd finally go back and beat Dark Souls 2 before Sekiro came out, which I ended up doing. Still not super impressed with that game, but it's good for a change, I suppose. Dark Souls 2 has that liminal space, weirdcore kind of vibe that makes it a good one to play if you're staying home sick and you've had some cough medicine. The first Dark Souls is the one I go back to the most often now. While Dark Souls 3 was what made me appreciate the combat of the series, Elden Ring has more or less made it redundant by doing all of the same things except better and with a more original game world. The atmosphere of Dark Souls 1 is unmatched. You can tell the world the developers were building truly felt as fresh to them as it did to players at the time. To new players of Dark Souls, or people who tried the series but couldn't stick with it, my advice is this: look past the hype around this game being the ultimate test of gamer skill. Just think of that as people trying to psych you out. You will need to get good before you can truly appreciate the game, and eventually you'll face challenges that you need to brute force. But for now, just focus on exploring the world and soaking in the atmosphere. Read a few item descriptions, experiment with a few weapon types, and use the low-level enemies in the first few areas to really get the hang of the game's combat at your own pace. Learn how to use invincibility frames with rolls. Learn how to parry. Get the hang of when to two-hand your weapon. Getting good will come, and yes, you'll have to force a good deal of it. But if you spend your entire time with the game forcing things, you'll miss the vibe of the game. You'll miss the atmosphere, and the story that just barely makes sense while still leaving enough up to interpretation for you to roleplay whatever character with whatever motivations you want. In between all the brutal combat and the segments where you just have to bang your head against it until it cracks before you do, this is actually a pretty atmospheric and pretty chill game.